Hello everyone, welcome back to Romania. Of course, starting on Saturday I'm doing a workshop, a heritage off the beaten path photography tour in the west side of the country, Transylvania, starting in Timisoara, and we're going out from there starting on Saturday afternoon. And actually, I've come early. I'm actually in the east side of the country now. I've landed in Bucharest last night and I've come out to do a bit of recceing ready for later in the year, because I'm actually coming back here in September to do another tour for 8 days, and of course next year I'm going to be focusing more on this side too. So I'm starting right here with heritage architecture. It's an old church ruins right deep into the middle of nowhere, as you can see, and it's a beautiful location. And I want to talk today about a question I've been getting quite a lot on the channel: how do you maintain your shadow details in architecture photography? Well, today I'm giving you the complete run through. Let's get on inside and talk about it. Beautiful space, lovely colours, shapes, but I've come in the middle of the day. Now that's great for capturing light rays. However, if we want to capture the actual space, the scene, and capture details in the shadows and throughout the space, this is very difficult and challenging. We've got bright highlights here, really dark shadows at the back of the room over there. We want to capture shadow detail because it's adding the depth, the drama, and the texture to our architecture photography. We want to make sure we're capturing the details on this log burner. There's a couple of candle holders that are stacked up in the left hand side there. We want to show details in them. We also, more importantly, want to show all those frescoes on the ceiling. We want to show those details off. So today we're going to be looking at how to do that, and the first lesson would be come at the right time of day. So in terms of the light source, where the light source is coming in, that's creating our strongest shadows and a lot of dynamic range in our scene, which is over here, of course, where the light's falling in through the missing slats. Yeah, a lot of strong shadows. Down here we've got the mid-tone areas, the mid shadows, and of course if I put my hand there you can kind of see some of that on the floor, the feet. You can see the shadow for myself down here. As the light falls away towards your right, you're getting softer and softer shadows until we get to underneath these chairs, and that's because on the other side you've just got the light. There is no light coming in. It's much softer. It's just kind of like a soft area. But there is also kind of in the back areas here where the light is kind of falling away, of course, darker shadows as well. That's currently, of course, I'm using natural light, the sun. So if this was to change, move positions, of course, this light would change. This shadow area would change. The mid shadows would change. If it was more behind our camera's position, there would be much more shadow area up behind me here, because there's more roof in this section. Okay, so there is actually 3 ways to photograph a scene like this, not 2. There's the artificial light source, which basically means you're using artificial light to basically fill the shadow areas and to bring it together in post. And there's pros and cons to that. However, today we're not looking at that. We've got 2 techniques to show you in camera with ambient light, with natural light source. So in other words, photographing the scene as it is when you arrive. Okay, so our first method, if we're going to be using natural light, would be to capture one bracket, one single frame, getting the settings as close to perfect as we can, and then editing them gently in post-production. Now that is not going to be very easy in here, but there is people out there who actually, fine art architecture photographers, who shoot in this manner, lifting the shadows purposely with one frame and then just almost like toning down the highlights in post, bringing up the shadows a little bit more, adding some contrast, and we're good to go. So I don't think it suits the scene when the foreground is the part of the scene that is brightly lit. That only works, for example, if you've got back windows or you've got some interesting light coming from the back of the scene through. I think it works better with that method. And I've done it before. So in here, we've got very bright highlights here and some shadows. I've got one bracket going, just a third of a stop over 0, ISO 200, f8, half a second exposure, and that would be our one frame. Now let's have a quick look at pulling that together in post. Okay, so with this very first photo, what we're looking to do, this kind of single bracket, is we're going to go into it and we're going to look to kind of be very careful with our adjustments. Just basically reduce our highlights, increase our shadows, so bring more light into the shadow areas. We can flatten out the image. We could reduce the contrast, but actually in this one it'll probably be fine just to increase it actually a bit. Blacks. We're also going to look to play with our whites, but be very careful with your whites. Of course, if you're going to emphasize brighter areas, if you do it too much, if you're going to keep increasing whites, for example, you're going to highlight those areas that are already overexposed. If I get this exposure bar and bring it right down there, you just saw the kind of highlights, just how much we're blown out on the highlights section on the bottom left. At this point, we're kind of there or thereabouts. What we're trying to do, the aim, is just to kind of balance out the photo, kind of make it light and airy almost. When doing this, just keep zooming into the image, checking it throughout. The final things we want to be doing, of course, is our colours, our saturation, our vibrance. Of course, we can play around there when we're doing that with our texture as well as our clarity and maybe a little bit of sharpening. And finally, we want to play around with that white balance and increase those golds, the yellow tones, and make the image a little bit more like it was to the eye. Okay, so the next method is going to be the HDR technique. Now for that, what we want to do is activate our bracketing in camera, and we either want 3 or 5. Now that we don't know yet. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be exposing for every single part of this scene, shadows and highlights. And we're going to try and blend those together in post. Now let's have a look at that method. Now because I'm going to be doing exposure bracketing here, the way to go about this is to, first of all, expose for my brightest exposure. Now the brightest exposure is going to be the one showing details in the shadow area. So the best thing to do here is to zoom on into the darkest part of the frame and then change your exposure settings so you can see that on the back of the LCD, is there enough detail in them shadows. So let's zoom on in to that back left-hand corner. I press the magnifying glass, I zoom on up to the section I want to look at, and then I can change my exposure to suit. When I change my exposure bar, so I've got the bar activated on the bottom, if I go from 1 second, it's dead on the middle of the exposure bar, plus 1 is 2 seconds. It's then showing nice detail in them shadows right at the back corner. When we zoom back out, of course, our frame is going to be completely, utterly overexposed, the rest of it. Just the details in the back corner are going to be okay. What we then wanted to do is do it the opposite way round. Let's have a look at one single exposure for our brightest exposure. In other words, for where the highlights are. So let's, again, reverse that. Let's zoom on into the highlight area and then change our settings throughout. I'll zoom on in. It's extremely bright, but if I go all the way down to -2, we are still very bright. Very, very, very bright. If we go to -3 and zoom back out, it's bearable. It's usable. It's not perfect, but it's usable. So that means with 5 brackets, one that's 3 under 0, 2 under, 1 under, 0, and 1 over, the 5 brackets combined would be our choice here. Let's activate the bracketing now then in camera. So let's turn that on, activate the brackets, and let's dial in our middle exposure. So that's what it does when you activate bracketing. Our brightest one is now 1 over. Just like we just said, the only difference is here now I've activated bracketing. And we've got five shots showing the whole dynamic range of the scene. Okay, so this time what we're going to do is we're going to look at our 5 brackets. We're just going to check the files throughout. So check our brightest exposure, check our darkest exposure. Make sure we've got the correct 5 basically, which we have. And of course there is still this speckled light issue, but that's to be expected. Now what we're going to do here is select them all, right click, photo merge, HDR, and it's going to come up with a box like this basically. Now you've seen this on this channel before, of course it's not a new thing. Now essentially that's creating like a HDR file, merging the images together to give it kind of higher dynamic range. So in other words, we should be able to play with our sliders much more dramatically. It will give us a lot more leeway. Now there's a box up at the top right hand corner here, auto settings and auto align. Now auto align leave on always. Auto settings, we can play with that on and off, and we can just check whether or not we think that's going to work for us or not. Now it looks decent without the settings, and normally I would say don't do it. You know, you don't need to put them on, do the settings yourself. Essentially all it's doing is a few gentle adjustments of what it thinks works best. So we can leave them on, press merge, and it's going to create that HDR. When it's done that, we can delete these files, the first 5, from the Lightroom catalogue, and we can basically go into this particular photo now and do the same adjustments to it really that we did the first photo. We'll go into the develop module, we will open it up, and we will try to look at the original auto settings that Lightroom applied, and you can see here what it thinks. And to be honest with you, looking at those, they're not that dissimilar to what the first image had applied to it. Highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, texture. We can probably just tweak these now and get it to somewhere where we think it's going to work best. Now ultimately, this should look fairly similar to the first image, but you're going to see a big difference, I think, overall. It's still not perfect, as we're going to see later. But just playing around with the texture now, the clarity, and of course then just the colours as well, the vibrance, saturation. And of course finally, that temperature, getting it to where it was to the naked eye. And that's pretty much it. We can now compare the two. If I get rid of the one with my finger in it, we can compare the 2 images side by side and see the differences. So of course, that's not foolproof. Realistically, we want to be coming here at the right time of day to photograph this space. It's becoming more and more difficult, and it's going to be some hours actually before the sun is in such a position that the scene here is lit nicely. I want to actually be going in here and making sure that we can see that fireplace, making sure that we can see the altar and all the details. Now the best thing to do is to combine the time of day with the methods we just looked at. So we're going to return later on today and we're going to redo this scene and we're going to show you what we mean. So it's been a few hours. I went to get some food and came back, did some footage outside and stuff, and of course it's become a bit more overcast, a bit more hazy outside. It's stopping that direct light and things have changed dramatically in here, to be honest. Okay, so firstly I've set everything up here, but before I actually take these shots I want to talk to you about the scene and the light and how things have changed and the impact it's going to have really on our final result. So let's go and have a look. So the key thing really, as I step on into the altar, is that we've now got no light over on this side whatsoever. The harsh shadows caused by that strong light coming in from that direction are now eliminated. They're gone sometime later. The mid-tones here are all pretty much staying the same. The mid-shadows, they're kind of pretty much the same because it was the centre of the room, remember. Over here, strong shadows, light at the bottom, nothing's really changed. However, we've got light illuminating this section of the altar now, speckled onto it. It's actually helping to bring those colours out, which I'm pretty okay with. It's going to look really good and help us to keep our focus where we want it. Finally, we've got some light falling into the back here in the altar section, but again, that's going to help draw our viewer's eye through to the back of the scene. So actually, it's going to be much better in our final result. So let's grab the shots. Coming at the right time of day really has helped us quite a lot, and I'm going to do one over, one in the middle, one under, focusing in the same place and capture that shot. It's a huge difference, really is a huge difference. That's everything today. I'm going to wrap up. I've captured loads of images, loads of content. I've been here for hours. I hope you appreciate the effort. If you've got any comments, I'd love to hear from you. Do write them below. It comes up quite a lot. I've tried to show you a little bit of the editing side, but there's going to be much more in the members section in terms of a full edit of this location. And there's more videos to come, of course, from here in Romania. And the tour starts, as I mentioned, on Saturday. So we're here for a couple of weeks. Plenty of content. See you all very soon. Bye-bye.